Welcome, everyone, and good afternoon, and welcome to Live from the Archive. I've been waiting for weeks to say that. I'm really excited about it. So my name is Megan Wilson-Reitz, and I am privileged to serve as the Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation Coordinator in the Stewart Center for Mission, serving the U.S.-Canada province of the Society of the Sacred Heart. And I am delighted to be joined here by Dr. Carolyn Osiek, RSCJ, who is the Charles Fisher Professor of New Testament Emerita at Bright Divinity School, as well as the Provincial Archivist for the Society of the Sacred Heart. Behind the camera today, even though you can't see them, we're joined by our producer, Erin Everson, the Communications Project Manager for the province, and Jennifer Morphine, who is the Director of Educational Initiatives and Leadership in the Stewart Center for Mission. And both of them will be helping us keep in touch with our live audience watching on YouTube. We're also joined by a live studio audience here in the archives in St. Louis, Missouri, by a number of members of the provincial team, by staff of the Stewart Center for Mission, and also team members for the Sacred Heart DNA program for young adults, which is launching officially tomorrow. Woo, woo, yes. Woo, woo. And so if you are interested in joining us, we go live with an online launch at 4 p.m. Central tomorrow and an in-person launch at 6 p.m. Central here in St. Louis. So if you want to register for that, Jenny will put the link in the chat, and we invite you to join us tomorrow. So we're really happy to have you here and excited for today's conversation. Today's program is the last in our series of Black History Month programs for the Sacred Heart family in the U.S. and Canada. Today we're going to be talking about a few of the documents and photos and other materials that Lynn has uncovered in the provincial archives here. They give us some hints about Black history within the society. Mm-hmm. And we're focused today on the period from 1865 to 2018. So first, maybe, Lynn, we could start by asking what spurred the idea for a conversation like this? Because the idea for this conversation today came from a message that you sent me. So
that's true. I was thinking one time about all the things that we really could highlight. You say from 1865 on, and the period before that has been very well documented, a lot of material available on the website. And so there are other things that have happened, and I just thought it would be interesting sometimes. And then Megan got the idea of doing it now and doing it live. So here we are.
Live from the archive.
Right.
Yeah. But right before we went live, you gave me a tour of the archive building, which I wish we could take the camera on a tour, because
another
it's a
time.
It's a really neat place. But tell me a little bit the process of finding some of these treasures.
Well, I've been archivist now for 13 years, and Michael Para has been here longer than that as assistant archivist, and we come across these things every once in a while, and sort of accidentally. You're looking for something else, and you open this file, and oh my gosh, this is something here that I didn't know was here. So that's kind of how it happens.
So there's probably more treasures that we haven't
I think
uncovered.
there are, probably, yeah.
And then we're starting today in 1865. Mm-hmm. So why 1865?
Well, before that, of course, is the unhappy story of enslavement, and that's really been well documented. Maureen Shequin and Emery Weber and others have done wonderful research on that, and it's all there. So from then on, we ask ourselves, what has been the relationship of the society with the African American community? And there's not it's not overwhelming amount of material, but there are some very interesting things to see.
I'm excited we're going to talk about some of them right now. In terms of the narratives about the history of enslavement, though, we have all of that material that, you've done a tremendous amount of writing on that, and that's published online, and Jenny will put the link in chat if people are interested in looking at that material as well. So our conversation then moves us forward in time from the close of the narratives in 1865, when we have the end of the Civil War and we have emancipation, past the end of the Civil War and into the parts of Black history that intersect with the history in the archives. But one of the earliest and the best known best documented Black members of the Sacred Heart family is Eliza Nesbitt. So what can you tell me about Eliza?
Oh, Eliza. the sort of oral tradition in the society was that she was an orphan who was given by Bishop Dubourg to Philippine Duchesne. Well, she was indeed given by Bishop Dubourg to Philippine Duchesne, but she wasn't an orphan at all. And that's research that Maureen Chiquin and Emery Weber turned up, that she had a large family. She had several siblings. She was born in Kentucky sometime around 1812. We're not sure exactly when. And we know the names of her parents, and she had at least 3 siblings. And she came to Florissant to be with Mother Duchesne sometime around 1822, we think. We're not sure. What we do know pretty certainly is that in 1825, she went to the new foundation in St. Michael, Louisiana. Mm-hmm. She would have stayed a few months at Grand Coteau, but then on to St. Michael, and she spent the rest of her life there. She died in 1889, and it's a very interesting life. She had at least 2 marriages. One husband ran out on her. She had several children, and she wanted to enter the society. And of course, in the situation, that was just impossible. And so she had a special title. She was a Sister of Charity of the Sacred Heart. And in her later years, at least, and we don't know how long this went on, every year at Pentecost, there would be a special ceremony when all of the sisters, the religious, would assemble in the chapel, and probably the students too. And she would process in with a lighted candle, and she would make a vow of charity. Mm-hmm. It was a big deal. Everybody was there. When she died in 1889, the narrative is that everybody went to visit her and her on her deathbed, and that she died a really holy death. I think people believed that she was holy, and she had a special permission, which she sought out, that went all the way to the Mother House in Paris, to be buried in the convent cemetery. Because otherwise other people were buried in the parish cemetery, but she was buried in the convent cemetery. And we have what we call the annual letters that were done every 3 years from every house and written up, and the biographies of deceased RSCJ. Mm-hmm. She is written up. She has a biography in the annual letter in 1889, and to my knowledge, nobody else who wasn't an RSCJ got that. So she was really very special.
And even at the time, even in the context, she was recognized as someone special.
Yeah.
And then tell me about this house at there's a room at
Stone Ridge School in Washington. There is now a contemplation room, a contemplation center it's called, and it's named after her. It's the Eliza Nebbit Center.
And it does say on the sign it's named for Eliza, and you said Nebbit, so sometimes it's written as Nesbit.
Nebbit, Nesbit, Nobbit. I mean, there are all kinds of variations on it, which is typical of names at that time. Right. Duchesne gets misspelled too, or spelled in different ways. So yeah, that was common.
But on that sign, it does say that she's a Sister of Charity of the
Sacred Heart.
So she's given that title.
That's right.
In our documents now. Mm-hmm. And so then what's the next piece of history that we have to talk about?
Well, the next place is St. Peter Claver's School. Maybe as early as 1866, informally, the Religious of the Sacred Heart at Grand Coteau, Louisiana, began giving primary education to children. Probably at that point, the children who were already living on the property. But in 1875, the elementary school for black students was formally established. It began with 16 students, and it stayed on the convent grounds until 1939, when it was moved down the road to the parish. And in 1942, it moved into the church. They got a new church, and the school moved into the old church. And the Religious of the Sacred Heart staffed it until 1947, when it was turned over to the Holy Family Sisters, that's Harriet DeLille's group and one of the African American congregations. So they then staffed it until 1978 when it was closed and the students were amalgamated into the parish and public schools there. Mm-hmm. So it was run there for quite a time, from 1875 until we were in it until 1947, and then it kept going until 1978. And there's good documentation about the Holy Family Sisters, and there's a list, actually, of graduates who became Holy Family Sisters. So there were good vocations that came from it.
From that,
to them.
Once they took over in 1947.
Yeah.
And that's sort of interesting, right? Because in all of the time before that the RSCJ were running the school, we don't have any evidence of any vocations coming from that school to
That's
RSCJ.
correct. That's correct.
So we don't know why, but we can probably conclude. We can conclude some things about that, but there isn't any actual documentary evidence
That's right.
that vocations came and were turned away. But
No.
we could suppose that probably may have happened. But the Holy Family Sisters, Henriette DeLille has we have some, at least oral tradition of a connection with the RSCJ as well.
Yeah,
right?
there's an oral tradition that when she wanted to form a new religious community, that she did her religious formation at St. Michael. Yeah, it's oral tradition. Oral tradition can be correct or not. We don't know. I mean, the oral tradition about Eliza, that she was an orphan, that was not correct. So we don't know.
And Henriette DeLille is now one of the handful of African American Catholics who are being considered
for sainthood. That's right. That's right.
So maybe we could claim her sort of as one of our saints.
Yeah, sure.
So and then also in that area, then we go on. Oh, you have some materials also from the community there, right? No, we go into the Thunstead Center.
Thunstead Center.
Yeah, so tell me about the
Thunstead
Thunstead Center.
Yeah. It's named after a Jesuit who was a devoted person there in the Jesuit community, Cornelius Thunstead. And he began in 1947 the idea of outreach to the local community, to people who really were in need at that time. But it was formally opened in 1982, and the first director was Margaret Mary Hoffman, Mike Hoffman, who was a beloved figure there. Besides her, at least 14 other RSCJ worked there over the years. And in the illustrations, you will see a flyer for the opening of the center in 1982. Mamie Jenkins, who we'll come back to in a minute in another way, but she was present there. And then also when at the end of the opening ceremony, Mike Hoffman was giving announcements. It's a wonderful place that's still going on under the capable leadership of Julia Richard, and it gives help with home health and emergencies and tutoring, and it's a community center, and it does wonderful things for the local community. And the RSCJ were involved over the years in many different ways.
And the reason we've incorporated it here is because the community that is being served in that space is primarily an African American community.
That's correct.
But also because the Thunstead Center has a lot of folks who were also at some point connected with Peter Claver's school, right? And so there's sort of a relationship over time that's been developed
Ongoing
in the community.
That's right.
Between the RSCJ and this local community. And then so some of the materials that you have are recognitions of that relationship, right?
Yes, if we move on to the 3 citations, they're very interesting. 3 citations of recognition by the African American community of Grand Coteau of the contribution of the Religious of the Sacred Heart. The first one, I think we're not showing a picture of. It was done in 1987, and it's a metal plaque that is at the school. But the second one was in 2001, and it was on paper, not on metal, And unfortunately, the original of this has apparently been lost in a house renovation, but not before we had a good picture of it. And I want to read it because it is very interesting. At the top, "Blessed are they who serve the Lord. Our community of faith honors religious of the Sacred Heart. For ministering to others' needs, for cheering hearts with thoughtful deeds, for walking closely in his way, for dedicating each new day to humble service, doing good, and teaching love and brotherhood. May he reward you with his love and countless blessings from above. We give you our love and our prayers. You are a part of our Black history here in St. Charles Parish." And it's dated February 25th, 2001. I think that the background on that is certainly the two things, St. Peter Claver School and the Fenstead Center, and the way in which those two institutions have created a relationship between the Black community of Grand Coteau and the religious of the Sacred Heart.
Over quite a few decades.
Over quite a few decades. And the other is very recently, from 2022. And that says, "Presented to the religious of the Sacred Heart for dedication to African American education in the communities of Grand Coteau, Bellevue, Sunset, Arnaudville, Léonville, Prairie Basse. From 1885 to 1975, St. Peter Claver School, Grand Coteau, on the first, it was presented at the first Juneteenth celebration in 2022, and the Sisters of the Holy Family also were honored, were recognized. So it was the contributions of the two congregations.
So there's a real relationship of respect there
Yeah.
over time.
Yeah.
And the Fenstead Center was recently the subject of an article in Heart Magazine. And so I think Jenny has a link that she'll put in chat to that article, so folks can read about what they're doing today, because it's still a very vibrant service center.
Yeah.
So the next person that you have in your list is pretty exciting. Tell me about her.
Yeah, this is Grace Damon, RSCJ. Grace Damon was born in Baltimore in 1872, and she entered the society in 1898, so seems like a long time ago. She was president of Manhattanville College from 1930 to 1945. And one person has said that she did more for race relationships than any other Catholic woman. She's most known for her alumnae address in 1938. This is the way it happened. In spring of 1938, there was an African-American girl who applied to Manhattanville College. She was accepted. It turns out she didn't come, but she was accepted, and that created a little stir among some of the alumni. And so on Alumni Day, May 31st, 1938, Grace Damon's address was called Principles versus Prejudices. You'll see the opening page of that. It's a masterpiece of moral reasoning. We have the gospel, we have church teaching, we have someone who is qualified, and therefore she's accepted, and it probably did not create peace and harmony among some of the alumni. We don't know really what the reaction was, but it broke things open. Obviously, the girl, as it went, did not come. However, within the next couple of years, someone else applied, another African American named Mary Louise Jenkins, who did come. Mamie was a musician, and she had attended mostly public schools. She was born in the Bronx, and she came on a music scholarship and graduated in let me see my date here. She graduated in 1946, and she had been a Methodist, became a Catholic while she was in college, and wanted to enter the society. And there was a policy that someone who had just become a Catholic should wait 5 years before entering a religious community. So she had 2 years to spare at the end. And so she got a master's degree in music education at Columbia, and then she entered the society. And I think most people, anybody who's been familiar with the society for a while knows Mamie.
And she was the first African-American sister to be accepted as
Yes.
a full member of the society.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and Mamie, one of the pictures is Mamie with a guitar, and that is just classic, you know.
Yeah.
She taught at many of our schools, particularly on the East Coast, but also at Villa Duchesne in St. Louis and in Grand Coteau, Louisiana. So she's a great figure.
We do have a copy of Grace Damon's
Principles versus Prejudices.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We do have a copy of that available in the Lincoln chat as well.
Oh, good.
So folks can read it if they want to see the masterpiece of moral reasoning.
Yeah, right.
And then the next piece you have was sort of a treasure that somebody else discovered.
And quite a surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is something that is not in our archive. I came across the reference in Shannon D. Williams' book, Subversive Habits.
Also linked in chat.
Mention of Maryville College in St. Louis. And it was really an interesting but very passing reference. And I wrote to the archivist of the Oblate Sisters of Providence about whom it was, and she promptly sent me the thing that I was looking for.
So the Oblate Sisters of Providence, in case our audience isn't familiar with them, are told quite a bit in this book. So Shannon D. Williams' book is called Subversive Habits, Black Catholic Nuns in the Long African American Freedom Struggle. It's a pretty valuable piece of history. And it's linked in chat, and she writes about the Oblate Sisters of Providence.
Quite a bit.
And they're one of the earliest congregations of black women religious in the U.S.
Right, 1828.
1828, by Marie Baylis and Servant of God, Mother Mary Elizabeth Lynch.
I think so.
I think that's how it's pronounced. And she is another one of the African American Catholics being considered for sainthood. And they are founded in Baltimore in 1829, are still active. And they founded the order, of course, because their own
they have a real
vocations-
archive, too.
They do, yes.
Yeah.
And their own vocations and those of other black Catholic women in the U.S. were not welcome in white women's orders
Yeah,
at the
that's
time.
right. That's right.
And they staffed a lot of schools for black children, which is why they probably ended up having a relationship with the RSCJ, right?
Yeah, the situation was that in this period after the First World War, there was a lot of tightening up of requirements for teachers. Teachers were to be properly certified, and that meant a college degree and the right kinds of courses. And they're teaching all week, and so they have to do Saturday classes. However, the situation for black sisters was that any Catholic sisters were not about to go to a non-Catholic college at this point. It would have to be a Catholic college, and there weren't colleges that would accept them. And so they were in a kind of a conundrum. And out of this comes this really interesting reference. This is in the House Journal of the St. Louis community of the Oblate Sisters of Providence in September of 1940. And it begins, Mass at 6:30 a.m. by chaplain, regular routine for the sisters. Today, Sisters Dominica, Cyrilla, and Charles began their Saturday courses at Maryville College. Now, that's the kind of thing you get in a house journal. I mean, there's nothing unusual about this. The next paragraph is not something you get in a house journal, and this is typed. House journals were often handwritten, but the fact that it was typed means this person, the journalist, is really thinking deliberately about what to say. And this is what it says. For more than 50 years, now this is 1940, so we're talking 1890. For more than 50 years, the religious of the Sacred Heart have been friends of the Oblate Sisters. And for the past 20 years, so that's from 1920, Maryville College has been opened to the Oblates for higher education. This was stunning to me And we started looking here and couldn't find anything about this. So this is something that, if you ask, well, what more where you want to go from here? I want to know more about this. Sure. And this will mean going into Maryville archives, which are not here, and also going back to the Oblates and asking for them to, if they know anything more about it, which of course is asking somebody else to do work. So, that's a little ginger about that.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And then there's other references that you have from the College of Grand Coteau. Mm-hmm. So along the same lines of, well, let me pause because we're talking about Maryville College, and just because they opened their enrollment for Saturday classes for teacher education for Oblate Sisters of Providence doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of the school would have been desegregated. Right?
No, and Williams points that out too. That doesn't mean the whole college was integrated. Sure. But the fact of having the black sisters come into the Saturday classes, I would just like to know more about what other Catholic colleges were doing it at that point.
Sure, and 1920 is very early.
1920, yeah.
But there's other stories of desegregation from a little later, yeah? And the next one you have is in 1954 or so.
That's right, that's right. And this is about the college at Grand Coteau. This, again, the fact that there was a college there is part of the whole movement that I just mentioned about upping the quality of education right after World War I. This one was begun in 1917. It was one of the earliest. At one point, the society in the United States was operating 9 colleges, which is incredible. And that couldn't be maintained. We were just stretching ourselves too thin, And the College of Grand Coteau struggled for enrollment and also for proper accreditation. It didn't really do well. But the courage that these people had to start in 1917. And they built a building in 1939, the building that is now called it used to be called Memorare Hall, and it's got a different name now, which is today the administration center of the school, was built, in fact, for the college. Now, the college closed in 1956. It had 50 students at the time. As I said, it wasn't doing well. It had to be closed. However, in 1954, there were 3 black students who were admitted, black girls. And one of them, in fact, we do have a testimony that she was so grateful to one of the other college students, a white student, because she had to get to Sunset across the highway for student teaching, and she didn't have a car. And this other student who was going in that direction always gave her a ride. So we have some short testimony there of the relations within the college. When the school closed 2 years later, of course, there were rumors that it was because it had been integrated. And what we have in the archives are letters from Sister Claire Cezanne, who was the president at the time, and from Gus Coyle, Jesuit, who was the chaplain, saying very strongly that was not the reason why the college closed, and that they were not aware of any repercussions from integration.
Which would have been remarkable had
it would have been remarkable.
No repercussions in 1954 in Louisiana.
That's right. That's right. But that was their testimony.
Fascinating.
So I just find that interesting.
Yeah. Jenny, do we have any questions in the chat at this point?
No.
So just letting our online audience know that we do have live chat going during the live stream, and you are welcome to ask questions, and Jenny will speak them to us if you have any questions for either one of us, but mostly for Lynn.
You too.
So tell me, so this is 1956 that we're up to at this point, and the next document you have is from the 60s.
It is from 1965, from the Selma March in 1965. There is a video, a program called Sisters at Selma, which I've seen, and no RSCJ appear in it. They managed to stay away from the camera. However, there were 4 RSCJ there. And
and several students as well.
Yeah, that's right. The classic photo that you get has 2 Sisters of St. Joseph right up in the front, and both of them had been my teachers a few years before that at Fontbonne College. But you will see a telegram signed by Martin Luther King inviting people from colleges to attend this march. The telegram is addressed to Manhattanville College. That's the one that was preserved. That's one of the kind of surprising things that I came across when I was looking for something else. I think that the same kind of telegram must have been sent to the other colleges as well, but we don't have them. Surprisingly, from Manhattanville, no RSCJ went, but 14 students did. From Barra College in Chicago, 27 students with 2 RSCJ, Nancy Kane and Margaret Green, both are deceased now. But also from Maryville, there were 7 students, including 2 RSCJ. Pat Barrett, the inevitable Pat Barrett, who was so active in justice issues, and Ann Webster. So there were representatives from 3 of the Sacred Heart colleges that attended that march.
I want to hear more about Pat Barrett some other time.
Oh, some other time.
Maybe
yeah.
we'll do that one for Women's History Month.
Yeah, she's marvelous.
So the next document you have moves us forward a couple of decades, and that is a photo of Sister Thea Bowman.
That's right.
So why is Sister Thea Bowman? So Sister Thea Bowman, in case you are, this is now the 3rd woman that we've mentioned today who is an African-American candidate for sainthood. She died in the early 90s?
1990.
1990. And we recently, or a couple of weeks ago, had a film discussion as part of our Black History Month series on the recent documentary that was released about her life. So if folks are interested, there's a link to that documentary in the chat. She is a really interesting personality, very much larger than life. And so how is a photo of Sister Thea in the Society archives?
1988, there was an Assembly of the Whole for the United States province at the 4-H Center in Washington, D.C. And on the program were a number of speakers. Jose Habde was one, and there were others. And one of the features was an evening of music with Sister Thea Bowman. She was already in a wheelchair at that time. She died 2 years later. But I remember it vividly, and I can see on faces sitting across from me here people who remembered it. You couldn't be close to Thea and not be inspired. She was just a person with such joie de vivre, such enthusiasm and love of life. And she could also sort of really say it straight when she analyzed a situation. She had, I think it was the next year, talked to the Catholic bishops and sort of laid it out, But she was a person who just you if you were around her, you knew, and you couldn't avoid her. You wanted to be around her. Yeah.
And so she was someone that many folks in the community would have gotten to know while she was visiting at that time.
Yeah.
And we move forward by another 20 years.
Yeah.
To our next document. So the next document actually does take us full circle back to what we started with talking about, which is the history of enslavement. So in 2018, we have a number of, I think that's where we are, right? In 2018, there's a number of conversations that are sort of coming to, culminating in an event. So the photos that you have are from this event. So talk to us about this event.
Well, it's just one photo that we're putting on, actually, but from the event. It was a culmination of 2 years of work and locating descendants and inviting them to this event, which it was organized by a committee of descendants and completely put on by them.
Mm-hmm. And you're talking about descendants now of people
People
had
who
been
were enslaved,
by the society.
By the society, that's right, yeah. It was September 23rd, 2018, and it was the work of Maureen Shequin and Irma Dillard and this community, of this committee, rather, an event, a very memorable event, and that is well documented again in a 12-minute video that Erin had put together that's on the website.
It's already linked in chat.
Yeah, mm-hmm. So we don't have to go into detail about that.
Sure.
But the sad thing is that 3 people we know who were there and important people have since died. Mm-hmm. Dorson Purdy and Leroy Hawkins and Mary Charlene Rhodes, who was not only a descendant but a graduate of the Academy at Grand Coteau, mm-hmm. who was a wonderful athlete in her youth, and she was CEO with her husband of their company in San Francisco and died very suddenly at the age of 62. Mm. So she was commemorated again at this Juneteenth celebration last year, at which some of our sisters attended. So that's a kind of a sad piece.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it's not the end of the story.
No,
either.
That's right.
Right? So what happens next? We were talking about Black history in the Society of the Sacred mm-hmm. Heart and in the province of U.S. and Canada, and of course that history is still being written, mm-hmm. right? So mm-hmm. what is next in that story? If you could predict us into the future, what's happening now, and what are we looking forward to?
Well, that's of course a broader question than the archives.
Yes.
And it's not for me to say what provincial plans are, but I would hope that the anti-racism inspiration that was begun will continue. Mm-hmm. From an archivist point of view, I would hope that we learn more about those Oblate Sisters of Providence
Sure.
at Maryville. So who knows what else?
And as documents turn up, of course, we will bring them into the historical record and share mm-hmm. them, mm-hmm. right? That's
absolutely.
That's a commitment I think that we all share.
One thing is, I think we're planning now to do on the website under significant figures.
Yes.
We've got Madeline Sophie and Philippine and Janet Stewart and Aloysia Hardy, and I think we're going to put Grace Damon.
Yes,
mm-hmm.
I think that's a great addition.
Yeah.
And I think Eliza Nesbitt is already listed
Eliza is there too,
as a key
of course.
figure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I think naming someone who has had that kind of impact as a key figure is great. That's exactly what we do, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And of course, we're always looking for other pieces of evidence. And Black history in this society is something that's still being written today, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And Jenny has a question for us from the chat.
From Irma Dillard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you speak to the why they have been no vocations from the Black community?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question, Irma, and probably you would have better ideas than I. I think William's book continues to point out what it's like in the culture of a white community for an African American woman, and that's what we hope to be able to change.
Sure. And I think that, we were talking a little earlier about Peter Claver's school mm-hmm. and how we see this increase in vocations, or a sudden emergence of vocations for Black students in the school once the Sisters of the Holy Family mm-hmm. take over the school.
That's right.
So it probably isn't that there weren't any vocations before that. That mm-hmm. would be very surprising if the Holy Spirit suddenly started to move mm-hmm. In the hearts of all of the students at that point, right? Mm-hmm. So it is likely that what happened there is what happened with many predominantly white religious orders, which mm-hmm. is that those vocations, when they emerged, would have been sent elsewhere, right, or just turned away.
That often happened, or that they tried and just couldn't do it.
Right, that's right.
You know, there's this adage that you can't be what you can't see. And I've pondered that because I think I have been things that I haven't seen, but there certainly is some truth to that, and the role modeling, I think, would be a big issue.
Sure. And we do have, I really am appreciative of the question from Irma, because Irma is one of 2 African American sisters active.
Three.
In the province.
Two in the province.
2 in the province. I think that's a good example of the ways in which, we say Black history is still being written, and of course it's still being written by not only the RSCJ, but associates and students and alumni and friends and partners and community members in the Black community who are connected with the RSCJ over a great deal of time and through many relationships. And so that history is still, it's part of this story, that we have a responsibility to tell that story and to recognize where the story hasn't been told and try to bring that to light. And those lives and those ministries continue to bear witness.
History continues.
History continues, and when it continues, it will show up in the archives.
That's
and
right.
We'll be back here for more. Very good. Okay. Well, that brings us to the end of our documents. And if there's any other questions in the chat, we could take them now. Do we have any questions from our live audience? We have this wonderful live audience in the studio. I wish you all online could see our incredible studio audience in the stacks of the archives here. Do we have any questions from our live audience?
Well, to wander back to Grace Damon, her choice to make such a strong statement resulted in a huge explosion in New York papers and among Catholic college presidents. And I think either the year after that or 2 years after that, the Pope issued a letter to leaders of Catholic universities saying they needed to step out and speak against racism and prejudice. So the impact of her statement was much wider than we might realize.
For sure. Did the microphone pick that up? Should we repeat the comment? Good. So, I think that's when you said that she's one of the women who's had the most impact on race relations, that may very well be why, right?
Yeah, it wasn't just this one thing. She was active with creating interracial relationships and committees and all kinds of things. She was really very active throughout those years. And she died very suddenly in office in 1945. So she would have, of course, gone on to do even more.
Sure. I guess that's our job now.
That's our job. That's right.
So, any other questions?
Just
yes.
to follow up from Irma Dillard as well. Could it possibly stem from those early letters between Duchenne and Sophie? And then she said, so glad Grace Damon was mentioned. She has nearly been erased from our oral history.
Yes, we really are working to correct that record because she is somebody who needs to be elevated in our awareness. But say more about the letters. So I'm not sure if the microphone picked up that question, but
it was again from Irma saying, could it be because of
possibly stem from those early letters between Duchenne and Sophie?
Early letters between Duchenne and Sophie. I'm not sure exactly, Irma, what you're thinking of, but Philippine Duchenne struggled with the whole question of racism. Was she racist? Yes, of course. I mean, she was a 19th century European ancien regime, and I think that she struggled with the whole issue of slavery and of enslavement and didn't want it, but had to accept it economically because that's the way the system ran. But and she was getting plenty of encouragement from bishops and priests and everybody else. but the building of a culture, maybe that's what Irma is talking about, the building of a culture.
She said from not taking black women.
For not taking black women.
Yes,
okay,
that's right.
okay. Yeah,
I remember this
Philippine wanted to start a sort of a third order or a kind of a special group for women of color. And what I was surprised to learn is that expression "women of color" is not new. It's very old, and the Philippines used it. And it was not to integrate women of color into the community, which would have caused all kinds of problems anyway around them, but she didn't do that. And so she was open to religious vocations from women of color, but not on the same status.
Right.
But, the Society of the Sacred Heart at that point already had 2 classes.
That's right.
Of choir religious and coadjutrix sisters. So out of that European mentality, they were used to that. And that was something that didn't work in the U.S. because Philippine would say often, she'd sort of complain that you can't hire anybody to work because everybody considers themselves equal. Everybody's equal. The irony, of course, was that was in a society with enslavement. So how they ever put that together, I've never quite figured out. But the whole social structure was very different.
Yeah.
Very different.
She just says, "Thanks, Lynn, because truth is healing. I appreciate your words."
Oh, okay, good.
Well, thank you to everyone who is online watching and everyone who is here in the archives. It's really great to have some folks over there, over here.
Yeah.
And thanks especially to Erin, our producer, and Jenny, managing the live chat. And of course, many thanks to you, Lynn, for doing all of this amazing research.
You're
it's
welcome.
Really exciting to be digging into this and to be looking forward into the future of what comes next in these conversations.
You don't know what else is here.
That's it. That's it. And there is so much here, folks.
Yeah.
If you are anywhere in or near St. Louis, you should come by and ask for a tour. It's really amazing. Yeah. So to our audience online, if you would like to see more events like this, please subscribe to our JPIC e-newsletter. It's a monthly e-newsletter from the Stewart Center for Mission. There's a link in the chat. And you can learn about upcoming programs and events in this vein and others as we move forward with the JPIC Commission, which is going to be creating a lot of exciting opportunities for more conversations like this. And lots of action alerts, resources, news about other issues that are in our umbrella of concerns and topics. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for everything.
And thank you, Megan, for the whole idea.
We're glad to be here. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.